Welcome to the Creek Road Baptist Pulpit. These weekly podcasts feature expository messages delivered to edify the soul. Now let's join Pastor Dave as he presents this week's message.
Take your Bible and join me in 1Samuel chapter 1. I'm going to begin a series of messages today in the book of 1Samuel. 1Samuel is so relevant. All the Bible is really, but I mean, there's so much in 1Samuel that we can say, yeah, that was written for our day. So we're going to explore some of those issues, and we're going to begin today with Hannah's problem, prayer, and peace. We're going to find out what's going on with a lady named Hannah and her family here in the first chapter of 1Samuel. Hannah's problem, prayer, and peace. And why don't we begin our reading here in verse 1 of 1Samuel, and then after we read, we'll have a word of prayer. So 1Samuel chapter 1, beginning in verse 1. Now there was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim of Mount Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jehoram, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephrathite. And he had two wives. The name of the one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. And this man went up out of his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice unto the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. And when the time was that Elkanah offered, he gave to Peninnah his wife and all her sons and her daughters portions. But unto Hannah he gave a worthy portion, for he loved Hannah, but the Lord had shut up her womb. And her adversary also provoked her sore, for to make her fret, because the Lord had shut up her womb. And as he did so year by year, when she went up to the house of the Lord, so she provoked her. Therefore she wept and did not eat. Then said Elkanah to her husband to her, Hannah, why weepest thou, and why eatest thou not? And why is thy heart grieved? Am I not better to thee than 10 sons? So Hannah rose up after they had eaten in Shiloh, and after they had drunk. Now Eli the priest sat upon a seat by a post of the temple of the Lord. And she was in bitterness of soul, and prayed unto the Lord, and wept sore. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thine handmaid, and remember me, and not forget thine handmaid, but will give unto thine handmaid a man-child, then I will give him unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head. And it came to pass, as she continued praying before the Lord, that Eli marked her mouth. Now Hannah, she spake in her heart, only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she had been drunken. And Eli said unto her, How long wilt thou be drunken? Put away the wine from thee. And Hannah answered and said, No, my Lord, I am a woman of a sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord. Count not thine handmaid for a daughter of Belial, for out of the abundance of my complaint and grief have I spoken hitherto. Then Eli answered and said, Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant thee thy petition that thou hast asked of him. And she said, Let thine handmaid find grace in thy sight. So the woman went her way and did eat, and her countenance was no more sad. So as I said, the book of Samuel is full of issues and items and teachings that are so relevant for our day, things that we need to know about, and we have them here in 1Samuel. And so as we look here, beginning in chapter 1, verse 1, we're just going to start off right from the very beginning. We have something about a family in this time in Israel. This is a period of time. It's coming to the period of the judges is coming to a close. And so it's during that time. There's no king in Israel. It's just during the time when the judges ruled in the land. And there's this family. And it's a family of a man by the name of Elkanah. Now you look at there in verse 1, it says, There was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim of Mount Ephraim. His name was Elkanah, and the son of Jehoram, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephrathite. That right away tells us who he is and where he's from. First of all, you'll notice that he is the son of, and it gives us this long list. If you go back to 1 Chronicles chapter 6, you'll find this very same list there in 1 Chronicles chapter 6. This is a family of Levites. And, of course, we know Levi had 3 sons, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. This is a Kohathite family. The Kohathites were Levites, and their job as Levites was to carry the furniture of the Lord. Actually, the Kohathites were to carry the ark of the Lord. And so this is a very specific family with a very specific duty in the family of Levi. And, of course, we know that the children of Levi, they didn't have an inheritance among the children of Israel. They just lived with their brethren. They didn't get a specific territory. So they lived in all kinds of places. And this particular family of Elkanah, he's now in a place called Ramathaim, which is probably Ramah, which is the city of Samuel. So he's living in the northern part of the country, and he's living in the area of Ephraim. But if you go through the entire list, all the way down to this grandfather of his named Zuph. See that? Z-U-P-H. Z-U-P. I wanted to name Aaron that, but Denise wouldn't let me. Zuph was an Ephrathite. Where is Ephrath? Ephrath is that place where we say Bethlehem Ephrath. Okay, so he was a Bethlehemite. He was living in the area where David would eventually come from. Zuph is his name, and so this family has moved from there apparently, and now they're in the northern part of the country, and they're living in Mount Ephraim. So we know he has a godly heritage. He has a specific duty to perform to the Lord. He's a Levite, so his job is very well defined. However, he lives in a very confused home. Notice verse 2. He had 2 wives. The name of the one was Hannah, the name of the other, Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Okay. At first, you read through that and you think, well, this is just window dressing, but it's really more than that. Because if we're looking into this family life, what we find here is a confused home because the Lord never opened the door for polygamy. He never said multiple wives is okay, ever. As a matter of fact, when Jesus was asked about divorce in Matthew's gospel, he said, well, from the beginning it wasn't so because God made them male and female, a woman for a man for a woman. That's God's design. 1 for 1. It's not 1 for 2 or 1 for 3. If it had been God's design, then we would have it in the beginning when he created men. But he didn't. He didn't do that. He gave 1 woman to 1 man, and that's the design for marriage. Now, you say, well, how's that? How in the world is that applicable to today? Well, just hang on to your hats. Because as the LGBTQ thing has taken over and swept across our nation, now that is not enough. And now you're seeing states and municipalities okaying multiple marriages. So now there are men and women who are marrying multiple men and women in our country, and that's going to be a thing. I'm telling you, in 10 years, we'll have forgot about the LGBTQ movement, and it'll be the polygamy movement, and it'll just sweep across our country. That's just the same. We've opened the door, ladies and gentlemen, in a way that I'm afraid we're going to find confusion in homes more often in our land than has been in the past. And that's what happened here with Elkanah. He was a godly man, but he had a confused home because he had 2 wives. And apparently that was his choice. And you'll notice it says the name of the one there. That word, one, comes up several times in this passage. You'll notice in verse 1 it said there was a certain man. Well, that's the same Hebrew word that we have here translated in verse 2 as one, a certain man. It says, it's like if you said in our vernacular, there was this one guy. There was this one guy in Cincinnati. Okay, that's the idea here. So the certain man. We're talking about one man. He lives in a certain place. He's from a certain family. He's this guy. And he has 1 wife. I think what happened here was he had Hannah as his wife. She was the first. And so instead of he had one who was named Hannah, I think she was probably the first one. I think we could translate that word first. He was his first wife. But because she was barren, he married Peninnah so that he could have children. So he felt, I don't know why, maybe he felt pressure to have children or something. So he married a second wife, but he kept the first. And so we have a confused home. We have a man with a godly heritage, but he's living in a confused home because of his own decisions. And I love Matthew Henry. I wrote this little quote down. Matthew Henry said, "Thus are men often beaten with rods of their own making." And so we have that happening here in Elkanah's home. Then we have verse 3. This man went up out of his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice unto the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. This man went up out of his city. So we find that this man, not only does he have a godly heritage, but this man is devoted to the Lord. He's going up to serve and to worship the Lord yearly. So he has a regular devotion. He goes and he does his part. And of course, no doubt this comes from this godly upbringing that he's had. He's a Levite. He has that heritage, and he knows that this is his responsibility as a man in Israel. And so he goes up yearly. So we can applaud that in him. But he goes up to a place that has been compromised. You'll notice that it tells us that he goes up to Shiloh, but at Shiloh we have the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord. If you go back to Hophni and Phinehas or find out about Hophni and Phinehas, you'll find out in actually the next chapter, in chapter 2, verses 12 through 17 and 22 through 25, that Hophni and Phinehas were doing some very wicked things. They were, well, I won't even go into it all right now. We may talk about that next time when we're in chapter 2. But they were very wicked men, and they were doing some abusive things with the women who came to Shiloh to worship. So we have a man with a godly heritage, a man who has a confused home because of his own choice, and a man who's going to worship, and we can applaud his devotion. However, the place he goes to worship is compromised because of the actions of the leadership of the tabernacle. Okay? Now, we come to verse 4. We get a little bit more in depth here in the home. Verse 4, and when the time was that Elkanah offered, he gave to Peninnah his wife and to all her sons and her daughters portions. But unto Hannah he gave a worthy portion, for he loved Hannah, but the Lord had shut up her womb. So the man is playing favorites between the two wives. He goes and he offers like he does every year, year by year. And this is an important part of the worship setting for him to give portions. As a matter of fact, in Leviticus chapter 10, we're told that the wave breast and the heave shoulder, that the children of Israel come and they offer to the Lord at the place of sacrifice, they're to be shared with, and it says, thy sons, thy daughters that are with thee, for it be thy due and thy sons' due, which are given out of the sacrifices of peace offerings of the children of Israel. So they would go up and they would make their sacrifices for sin, and then their sacrifices for peace offerings, and then the peace offering sacrifice, part of that was given back to the worshiper so that the entire family could celebrate and be involved in the sacrifice. Only the man could go in with the animal. Only the man could slaughter the animal and help the priest divide out the portions. Only the man could do that. But once that was done, the priest would give him a portion of that which was sacrificed, and he would take it back out to his family, and it would be prepared, and everybody there at the tabernacle would have a meal. And so they would eat together as they worship the Lord. Same thing that we do when we sit at the Lord's table, isn't it? We have a fellowship meal together at the Lord's table and celebrate his presence with us. Well, they would do the same thing. They would celebrate the sacrifice and all God had done for them. But you'll notice that even though he was giving portions to both wives, to Peninnah and to her sons and her daughters, he gave what's called a portion or portions to them, which was his due and their right. But it says to Hannah, he gave a worthy portion. For he loved Hannah. Hannah becomes for us a symbol of the church. Now, notice that it says a worthy portion. I said that word one shows up several times. It's in verse 1 with that word certain, a certain man, or there was one guy, one man. It shows up in verse 2 with Hannah. She was one of the two wives, but probably the first. And then it shows up here again in verse 5. Hannah gave a worthy, or to Hannah he gave a worthy portion. That word worthy there is the same word. He gave the first cut. He gave the best slice to Hannah. She got the best of the portions that he gave out. Why? Because he loved Hannah. But the Lord had shut up her womb. And as I said, Hannah becomes for us a symbol of the church. Seated at the Lord's table, in the place of honor, served by the Lord of glory, and loved by him despite her inadequacies. Peninnah had children, so she felt like she was right to get portions. But Hannah had no children. And so what did she feel? She must have felt like she was a failure. She must have felt like she was a third wheel. She must have felt like she was not loved, that she was not, no one really cared about her because of the fact that she couldn't have children. But you'll notice that it says that Elkanah loved her despite her inadequacies. Ladies and gentlemen, you know what we feel? We feel inadequate when we come to the table of the Lord. Why? Because we don't have all that we think we should have to serve him, and yet he loves us. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. We don't deserve that. We don't deserve a worthy portion. We don't deserve to sit at his table. We don't deserve any of that. And yet he gives it to us. Why? Because of what we've done? No, it is never based on merit. It is always based on love. And it's not our love for him. It is his love for us. Because we sit there, ladies and gentlemen, we probably say to ourselves, just like the Shulamite in Song of Solomon said, I'm black but comely. I don't really belong here. I don't belong with this king. He is more than I am. He is greater than I am. I have nothing to bring and offer to him. And so Hannah, she had nothing to offer to him. She had no children. None whatsoever. And yet he loved her despite the fact that the Lord had closed her womb. That's such a beautiful picture of the church. Unto Hannah he gave a worthy portion. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. Jesus has given you a worthy portion. Why? Because you're worth it? Because you deserve it? No. Because he loves you. That's why. To Hannah he gave a worthy portion, for he loved Hannah. Now, what we see in verse 6 and following is the adversarial relationship between these two wives. Peninnah was jealous, and she was bitter because of the favoritism of the man. You'll notice there in verse 6, and her adversary also provoked her sore for to make her fret because the Lord had shut up her womb. Can you just imagine? What if you were a little fly in that house? Can you imagine the conversations, the little whispers, the things said? Oh, wouldn't that be a juicy little gossip to hear what Peninnah said to Hannah? Oh, you know how this goes. And she attacked her worth to her husband. You're not worth him. He doesn't really love you. You're nobody. You can't even have his children. Go ahead, come in here and clean this up. Come in here and do this job. Good for nothing. I'm sure those were some of the words that were used from Peninnah towards Hannah. She attacked her worth to her husband, and you'll notice verse 7, and they went up year by year when she went up to the house of the Lord. So she provoked her, therefore she wept and did not eat. So not only did she provoke her in the home, but when they were going to worship, she provoked her. She attacked her worth to the Lord, no doubt. God doesn't love you. He hasn't given you children. Nobody loves you all the way up. And you'll notice that it says this there in verse 7, year by year. How many years? Don't know. But it's a long time. It's a long time. And she's listening to this all the way to Shiloh and all the way back home. You have an enemy, church. And you know what he does? He attacks your worth. He attacks your self-worth. He attacks your worth in society. He attacks your worth in your family. And he attacks your worth to the Lord. He's always telling you what you aren't. He's always telling you just how bad you are. He's always telling you what a waste you are. He's always attacking your integrity. He's always attacking your soul. All the time, he is doing that. He attacks you in the home. He attacks you in the church. He attacks you on the way to church. He attacks you on the way home from church. He attacks you on the way to work, at work, in the grocery, in the school. It doesn't matter where you go. We have an enemy who prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone that he may devour. Doesn't he? Yeah. Oh, and we can think of people like Job when Satan came before the Lord amongst the sons of God, and Satan, he accuses Job before the Lord. That's pretty bold, isn't it? But he's bold, this lion. He's bold. And what about Peter? Jesus told Peter, Satan has desired to sift you like wheat. Yeah, Satan has desired to sift you like wheat. But what did Jesus say to Peter? He said, I've prayed for you. Wait a minute. Hang on a second. You could stop him from doing it altogether, Jesus. You could keep him from sifting Peter like wheat, but he doesn't, because Peter needs that. And I think maybe Hannah may have needed this as well. And I think perhaps we may need it also, because I remember the words of David when he said, it's good for me that I was afflicted. Although we don't want it, it often produces graceful results. And so they go to the temple of the Lord, and it says there that she wept and she did not eat. So they're there, and she's going to participate in a fellowship meal. She's going to eat from the heave portion of the shoulder, except she's not. But that's her duty, that's her right, that's her gift. But she's not going to eat because she's so insulted, she's so abused, she's so hurt in her soul. And then you'll notice verse 8. Elkanah, her husband, comes to her, and he has a series of questions that he asks her. Why weepest thou? Is he completely blind to the things going on in his own home? Is he completely blind to the things going on in his own home that he has created by having two wives? He's not taken account of the mess that he's caused by having two wives, apparently. He says, why eatest thou not? This is what you do when you come to the temple, and I've given you the worthy peace. But he doesn't seem to recognize the pattern of self-abuse that Hannah places herself under because of the words of Peninnah. Why is thine heart grieved? He finally comes to the root cause here in this question. It is a matter of the heart. This is soulish in nature, and it's just not an emotionally bad day. She's suffered under this year by year. And finally he asks, what about this grieving heart? He knows that it's soulish. And then he asks this question, am I not better to thee than 10 sons? Yeah. Now, of course, how would you answer that question? No, Elkanah, you're not better than 10 sons. This is it seems right on the face of it, such a self-absorbed statement. He must think he's pretty good to say this. Am I not better to you than 10 sons? No, don't think so. This self-absorbed statement by Elkanah is interesting. If we wondered what kind of man he was before, he just opened his mouth and removed all doubt because he asked a very silly and selfish question. However, let me turn the tables just a little bit here. Remember, I said back there in verse 5, that Hannah represents for us the church. And here I think also she represents the church. Because when he asked this question, I can just hear the Lord asking me this question when I complain about what I don't have. And my question to me is, which is more important, the Lord's love for me or what I can get from him? Which is more important, the Lord's love for me or what I can get from him? And so when he asks this question, am I not better to thee than 10 sons? I say to him, yes, Lord, you are better to me than anything I might receive from you. You're better to me than the worthy portion. Your love is better for me, and I enjoy it more than anything else that you could ever possibly give me. But you see, Hannah is focused on the sons. She's focused on not having any children because that's all she's heard for years. You're no good, you're no good, you're no good because you don't have any children. And she thinks that the one thing that's going to make it okay is to have children. And the question that Elkanah poses here, even though I think it's a selfish question on his part, I think it's a good question for us to ask ourselves. Is the Lord's love enough? Or do we have to have something? Do we have to be something? Do we have to achieve something before we can ever think that he loves us? Am I not better to thee than 10 sons? Yeah. Remember what the Song of Solomon says there in chapter 7. He said, the Shulamite says, I am my beloved's, and his desire is toward me. It's not toward the things I have. It's not toward the things I can do. It's not toward whatever merit I can create or things that I can accomplish. It's all about his desire toward me. I am my beloved's, and his desire is toward me. Verse 9 says, So Hannah rose up after they had eaten in Shiloh and after they had drunk. Now Eli the priest sat upon a seat by the post of the temple of the Lord. And she was in bitterness of soul. Of course she is. She's been suffering under this yearly, under all of this abuse, and now her husband has sort of focused all of this when he asked her these series of questions. So she's in bitterness of soul. We understand that. And she does one thing with her bitterness, sorrow and complaint, that, ladies and gentlemen, is outstanding. She prays. And she prayed unto the Lord. She doesn't take revenge. She doesn't plot to hurt and get back at her adversary. No, she just prays. How wonderful that is. What a great source of hope this is for us. She takes all that abuse, all that misunderstanding, even the misunderstanding in her own heart, and she goes to the Lord in prayer. And she wept sore, it says. He knows and counts the tears. She's weeping there by the outside door of the tabernacle, and she's weeping and she's praying. And remember that the Lord, he collects the tears, and he writes down all the petitions. Psalm chapter 56 tells us, Thou tellest my wanderings, put thou my tears into thy bottle, are they not in thy book? Can you imagine the wall that the Lord has in heaven somewhere? Shelves after shelves of bottles with tears, all of them labeled with the names of those who shed them, over all the afflictions and all the condemnations and all the hurt and all the disappointment and all the abuse in life, all those tears in bottles. And the Lord knows every one. He writes down those complaints. He writes down those requests in his book. And then verse 11 says, she vowed a vow. We have that there beginning in verse 11. She vowed a vow, and she said, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thine handmaid, and remember me, and forget not thine handmaid, but will give unto thine handmaid a man-child. Yeah. So here's her vow. A vow is meant, ladies and gentlemen, to focus the mind and the spirit. It is more for the individual than it is for the Lord. He doesn't need our vows. He needs our heart. So don't think that a vow will move the hand of God to do something for you. It will not. Vows are not a method by which you can manipulate heaven. Vows are a method by which you might refine yourself. Because a vow takes us and puts us in a slot, in a lane, from which we're not going to move ourselves for whatever period of time we vowed to do it. Whether it's a fast or whether it's a lifestyle change or whatever it might be. We vow, and we say, Lord, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do it from now until. And so that's exactly what Hannah does. She makes this vow. She says, I'm going to make a lifestyle change. Things are now going to be different. She says, then I will give him unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head. This is the Nazirite vow. So this child that she asked for, she wants to give it back to the Lord, give him back to the Lord, and she says he will be a Nazirite. No razor will come upon his head. This reminds us, of course, of another judge who was a Nazirite from his birth, Samson. That long, beautiful hair of his. And now we have another one, Samuel, who's going to come into the world as a Nazirite. 11 through 13, we have her promise. It came to pass as she continued praying before the Lord that Eli marked her mouth. Now Hannah had spake in her heart, and only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she had been drunken. Now maybe this is why Eli was at the door. He knew his sons, and he knew what kind of men they were. Actually, the Bible tells us in chapter 2, they are sons of Belial. These are ugly men. They do ugly things. And so perhaps Eli's by the front door of the tabernacle instead of resting in his home. Perhaps he's sitting by the front door of the tabernacle because there's a lot of people here this day, a lot of women out here. Maybe he's there just to make sure everything remains holy and safe. And so he's out there and she sees this woman, and perhaps there have been many women who have drunk a little too much wine, and they come outside and they act a fool. So Eli says to her, "How long will you be drunken? Put away your wine." We can understand why he might say that. It wasn't because he was being angry or he was picking on her. Or he wasn't trying to add to her affliction. He was responding out of the situation that he was living in there. So we can understand this condition. We can understand his response. But Hannah immediately says, "Oh no." Verse 15. Hannah answered and said unto him, "No, my Lord, I am a woman of a sorrowful spirit." Now notice that she shows respect to the man of God. She calls him Lord. "Sir," she says, "Sir, I am a woman of a sorrowful spirit." And she tells the truth about her condition. She says she's sorrowful, which of course we understand that she is. She says, "I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink." Is it possible that what we have right here is the vow of the Nazarite started in mom before the son is ever conceived? I have not had wine or strong drink. Those words and that sequence of words is exactly like you would find it in the book of Leviticus when it tells us about the Nazarite vow. No wine or strong drink. And that's what she says to Eli. I have not had wine or strong drink. She just made a vow dedicating this boy that she's going to have to the Nazarite vow. And now she says, and the second part of it, she claims for herself, I have not had wine or strong drink. All great faith, ladies and gentlemen, starts in the home with faithful parents. And so what we're going to find for this boy Samuel is a faithful mom who is living according to her confession. And what a lovely picture of prayer we have here in this next statement. But have poured out my soul before the Lord, just like a libation poured out on the altar on the other side of that wall. So she sacrificed to the Lord of hosts with a heart poured out. And ladies and gentlemen, I would dare say that that libation poured out from her heart was greater than anything that was happening on that altar on the inside. She prayed. And she said, no, I don't drink wine or strong drink. I just made a vow to that effect. And by the way, I'm pouring out my soul before the Lord. Verse 16, count not thine handmaid for a daughter of Belial. We don't, but Eli might have just because of the condition of things. For out of the abundance of my complaint and grief have I spoken hitherto. The abundance. Do you hear that? The abundance of complaint and grief. Yes, she's very grieved, and she has a right to complain. She lives in a home that's broken and confused. She's worshiping at a place that's compromised, but she doesn't trust in any of that. What she trusts in is the Lord that she just prayed to. Eli answered and said, go in peace. So we go from Eli saying, why are you drinking so much? Go home. To a fatherly blessing that he gives her when he says, go in peace. And the God of Israel grant thee but thy petition. This is what prayer, ladies and gentlemen, grants the soul that is bound up with complaint and grief. It grants it peace. The God of Israel grant thee thy petition, he says. This is the hope that prayer offers us. It's not a hope based on performance. It's not a hope based on merit. It's a hope based in the promise of God. And this is spoken by the man of God there at the place of God. When he says, go in peace, and the God of Israel grant thee thy petition. You know what she hears? She hears the Lord saying to her, I got this. I got this. We have this wonderful man of God saying these wonderful words to this lady who has just offered the best sacrifice that day. And then you'll see this. That very last thing that Eli says, go in peace, and the God of Israel grant thee thy petition that thou hast asked of him. This is a warning. We must pray and lay out our hearts before the Lord. So many times we make complaint, but our complaint is not to the Lord. So many times we grieve about what we don't have or what we do have, and we don't take that at all to the Lord. Ladies and gentlemen, the closets are cold and dusty in our lives. We need to go to the Lord in prayer. Not talk about prayer, not read about prayer, not think about prayer. We need to pray. And this woman prayed. He said, thou hast asked of him. She did it. And the reason and the thing that happens because she did it, she goes away with peace. And she goes away with her petition answered. We must pray. And then we conclude there in verse 18. And she said, let thine handmaid find grace in thy sight. So the woman went her way and did eat, and her countenance was no more sad. So she eats that worthy portion. Now she celebrates the worship with the family. Now she can go back, and Peninnah can talk all she wants. It's not going to land on a soul that's receptive. She doesn't going to hear it anymore because she's made her prayer. She's vowed a vow to the Lord, and Peninnah can talk and talk and talk all she wants. It's not going to affect her one little bit because now she has peace. Now her countenance is changed. Why is her countenance changed? Why is she no more sad? Because now she has hope. Now she has peace. Why? Because she's prayed. And she's dependent upon that promise of prayer, that God hears prayer. And she's received the blessing from the man of God. Go in peace. The God of Israel grant thee thy petition. So she went her way, did eat, and her countenance was no more sad. This is Hannah's promise. This is Hannah's strength. Hannah was a woman of God, not because of who she was or what she had done or where she lived or who she lived with. She was a woman of God because she knew the power of prayer. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, this is an example for every one of us.
Jesus will meet you.
Thanks for listening to this week's message. Please join us again next time for another installment of the Creek Road Baptist Pulpit.